I called my attorney on a Thursday morning, not because I was angry, because I was done. Let me back up. My name is Beverly. I'm 63 years old. For the past 22 years, I have pressed shirts for a living. I work at a dry cleaning counter on the corner of Maple and 9th in Denton, Texas. I open at 7. I close at 6. I go home to my 2-bedroom rental on Creekside Drive. I heat up whatever I made Sunday, and I go to bed. That is my life, and I have never once been ashamed of it. What I am is tired of explaining it to people who never asked. My son's name is Patrick. He's 34, graduated from UT Austin with a business degree, which he is very proud of and which he reminds me of regularly. His wife's name is Kelsey, spelled with 2 L's and an IE at the end, which she also reminds people of regularly. They live in a 4-bedroom house in Frisco, drive matching SUVs, and belong to a country club I've never been invited to. Not by omission, by design. I know that sounds harsh. Maybe it is, but I also know what happened at my grandson's birthday party in April, and I've had a long time to sit with it, and I'm done softening the edges for people who never softened anything for me. Cody turned 7. Patrick and Kelsey threw the party in their backyard, bounce house, catered barbecue, the whole thing. I drove up from Denton with a card and a gift. The card had a $20 bill in it because Cody likes to pick out his own things, and the gift was a wooden tool set I'd ordered from a craftsman on Etsy. Hand-sanded. Oak. The man who made it signs each one on the bottom. I thought it was beautiful. I thought a 7-year-old boy who likes to build things would love it. I was wrong about the audience, apparently. Kelsey opened it for him. I don't know why she was opening his gifts, but she was. And she held it up and looked at it the way you look at something you found on the side of the road. She turned to her mother, who was standing 3 feet away with a glass of Chardonnay, and she said, loud enough for the 6 people nearest her to hear, "A wooden toy? Handmade?" And then she laughed. Not a polite laugh, the real kind, the kind that's meant to include everyone around you. Her mother said, "Oh, how rustic." Cody was already running toward the bounce house. He never even looked at the tool set. I looked at Patrick. Patrick picked up a paper plate and started loading it with brisket. That was the moment, not the laugh, not the rustic. The plate of brisket. My son, standing 6 feet away while his wife mocked his mother's gift in front of a yard full of people, and his response was to get more food. I stayed another 40 minutes because I wasn't going to give Kelsey the satisfaction of watching me leave hurt. I said goodbye to Cody, who hugged my legs and asked if I'd come back soon, which nearly undid me. I hugged Patrick, who said, "Thanks for coming, Mom. Drive safe." Like I was a neighbor. Like I was someone who dropped off a casserole. I drove home to Denton. I cried somewhere around Louisville. Then I stopped because I had things to think about. Here is what Kelsey does not know about me. Here is what Patrick, truthfully, does not fully understand either, because I raised him to believe that money was private and that what you did with it was your own business, and that the size of your paycheck had exactly nothing to do with your worth as a human being. I believed all of that. I still believe it. I also have $2.3 million in a brokerage account that I've been building since 1987. My father worked for a railroad. When he died in 1989, he left me $14,000. My mother said, "Spend it on something nice, Beverly. You deserve it." I took it to a financial advisor instead, a woman named Ms. Okafor, who sat across a desk from me and explained compound interest in a way that rearranged something in my brain permanently. I was 28 years old. I put the $14,000 in index funds and I did not touch it. For 35 years, I have lived on my salary from the dry cleaning counter. I clip coupons. I drive a 2009 Camry with 140,000 miles on it. I take my lunch to work in a green cooler that I've had since 2004. I have not done these things because I am poor. I have done them because I decided a long time ago that I was going to be free. And freedom, the kind that actually lasts, is built quietly, without anyone watching. Patrick knows I invest. He does not know how much. I never told him because I didn't want it to change things. I wanted him to love me because I was his mother, not because of what I might leave him someday. That was my choice, and I made it deliberately, and until that party in April, I thought it had worked. The brisket plate told me otherwise. I didn't call Patrick for 3 weeks. He called me twice. Left voicemails that said, "Hey Mom, just checking in," and nothing else. No mention of the party, no mention of Kelsey. On the 3rd week, he texted, "You okay? Haven't heard from you." I texted back, "Fine," just thinking that was true. What I was thinking about was the house. 2 years ago, Patrick and Kelsey decided they wanted to move from their starter home in McKinney into something bigger in Frisco. The house they wanted was $680,000. Their pre-approval came in at $540,000. They were $140,000 short on the down payment. Patrick called me. He was nervous. I could hear it. And he said, "Mom, I know this is a lot to ask." And I said, "How much?" And he told me, and I said, "Let me think about it." I thought about it for 1 week. I did not think about whether I could afford it. I thought about whether I should, whether it would change something between us, whether Patrick was asking because he needed help or because he assumed I would give it. I decided I wanted to help my son. That's the truth, stripped of everything else. I wanted to help him have a home for his family. So I transferred $140,000 to his account. No interest, no paperwork, a gift. I told him one thing, "This is between us." He said, "Of course, Mom. Thank you. We'll pay you back." He never mentioned it again. I never asked about it again. After the party, I thought about that $140,000 for a long time. I thought about Kelsey holding up the hand-carved tool set with that look on her face. I thought about her mother saying, "Rustic." I thought about her mother saying, "Rustic." I thought about Patrick and the brisket, and I thought, they live in that house because I made it possible. They are hosting parties in that backyard because I wrote a check, and not one of them knows it. Not even the one who should. I also thought about Cody. Cody is the reason I took 3 weeks before I made any decisions. Because Cody is 7 years old and he runs to me when I arrive, and he asks me to read to him, and he shows me the things he builds out of Legos with the kind of pride that only children have, where they haven't yet learned to be embarrassed by joy. Cody is not responsible for his parents. Cody is the best person in that family, and he doesn't know it yet. Whatever I did, I was not going to hurt Cody. That was the line I drew before I did anything else. On a Thursday morning, about 5 weeks after the party, I called my attorney. Her name is Ms. Hargrove, and I have used her for estate planning for 12 years. She is 71 years old. She has silver hair cut very short, and she has never once made me feel like I didn't belong in her office, which I appreciate more than she knows. I told her what I wanted to do. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Beverly, are you sure?" I said, "I've been sure for 5 weeks. I just needed to get here. What I wanted was this. I wanted to restructure my estate so that the money I had set aside in a sub-account for Patrick, separate from the general fund, earmarked informally for his inheritance, would be redirected, not removed from him entirely. Changed. Conditioned. Ms. Hargrove drew up a revocable trust. The terms were simple. The money set aside for Patrick, approximately $480,000, would be held in trust. He could access it under 2 conditions. First, that he completed a financial literacy course, the kind that covers budgeting, debt, investment basics, things that, frankly, his mother should have made him learn when he was 16 and didn't. Second, that he came to me directly in person, and we had a conversation about what happened at that party. Not an apology necessarily, a conversation, real words, not a text. Until both conditions were met, the money would sit. For Cody, I set up a separate 529 education account, fully funded, irrevocable. No one could touch it. Not Patrick, not Kelsey, not me. It would be there for Cody when he turned 18, and it would pay for whatever he wanted to study, and it had nothing to do with anyone's behavior at any party. That part made me feel good. That part I did not second-guess for a single second. I did not tell Patrick any of this immediately. I want to be clear about that. I did not call him up and announce what I'd done. That's not how I operate. I made my decisions quietly, the way I've made every decision in my life, and I waited. What I did do was invite Patrick to lunch, just him, not Kelsey. I told him I wanted to catch up. He seemed surprised. He said, "Sure, Mom, of course." And I heard something in his voice that sounded like guilt, though I may have been projecting. We met at a diner in Allen, halfway between us. He ordered the club sandwich. I ordered coffee and eggs. We talked about Cody for a while, about Patrick's job. He manages logistics for a mid-sized distribution company. He's been there 8 years. He's good at it. We talked about his sister, who lives in Portland and whom he doesn't see enough of. Then he got quiet and he looked at his sandwich and he said, "Mom, about the party." I waited. He said, "Kelsey she gets caught up in stuff, appearances. Her family is really into that, and sometimes she doesn't think before she." I said, "Patrick." He looked up. I said, "You were there too." He put the sandwich down. He nodded slowly, in the way that men do when they know they've been caught and they're deciding whether to keep running. Patrick, to his credit, stopped running. He said, "I know. I didn't handle it well. I'm sorry, Mom." I looked at him for a long time. I've known this man since before he had a name. I watched him learn to walk in the kitchen of our old house on Birchwood, holding on to the cabinet handles, looking back at me every 2 steps to make sure I was watching. I watched him graduate, marry, become a father. I have not always agreed with his choices, but I have never stopped loving him, and I don't intend to. I said, "I know you are, and I forgive you, but I need you to understand something." He said, "Okay." I said, "What happened at that party was not about the tool set. It was about whether you were going to stand up for your mother when it mattered. And you didn't. And I need you to think about why." He was quiet. I said, "I'm not asking you to fight with Kelsey. I'm asking you to be a man who respects his own mother enough to say, in your own home, with your own voice, that certain things are not acceptable." He nodded again. This time it looked different. This time it looked like something landing. We sat there for a while longer. We finished our food. On the way out, he hugged me, a real hug, not the neighbor hug, and he said, "I love you, Mom." I said, "I love you too. Now earn it." He laughed, a little confused. I just patted his arm. He would understand later. What I did not expect was the phone call I got 9 days after that lunch. It was Patrick, and he was not calm. He had found out about the $140,000. I don't know how. I suspect Kelsey had been going through financial documents. They were doing some refinancing on the house, and she apparently found old bank statements or a notation somewhere. I'm not entirely sure of the details. What I know is that Patrick called me at 8 in the morning and said, "Mom, did you give us $140,000 for the down payment on our house?" I said, "Yes." There was a long silence. He said, Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "I told you it was between us." He said, "I thought you meant between me and you, not Mom. Kelsey is." He stopped, started again. "Kelsey is really upset." I said, "What is Kelsey upset about?" Another pause. Then, "She feels like you've been." She says it changes things. The dynamic. She says she didn't know you had money like that, and she feels like she's been, like we've been. I let him work through it. I did not help him. He said, "She feels embarrassed." I said, "Does she?" I did not say it cruelly. I said it the way you say something when you are giving someone space to hear themselves. He said quietly, "Yeah." I said, "Patrick, I gave you that money because I love you and I wanted you to have a home for your family. I didn't tell you the full picture of my finances because that is my private business and because I didn't want it to change how you saw me. I wanted you to see me as your mother, not as a source of something." He didn't say anything. I said, "How did Kelsey see me before she found out?" He didn't answer, and his not answering was the answer. I said, "I'd like to have a conversation with both of you when you're ready." He said, "Okay, yeah, okay." That conversation happened on a Saturday 2 weeks later. Kelsey sat across from me at their kitchen table, the kitchen in the house I helped pay for, with her arms folded and her jaw set, and I could see that she had rehearsed things to say to me. I recognized the look. I've seen it before. It's the look of someone who has decided they are the wronged party and is waiting for the moment to say so. I let her go first. She talked for about 4 minutes. She talked about feeling deceived. She talked about how if she'd known I had money, things would have been different. She talked about family transparency and trust. She used the word dynamic 3 more times. I waited until she was done. Then I said, "Kelsey, what you just told me is that you would have treated me differently if you'd known about my finances. I want you to sit with that." She blinked. I said, "You laughed at a gift I brought for my grandson. You called it rustic in front of a yard full of people. And now you're sitting here telling me you're upset because you didn't know I had money. Do you hear what you're saying?" She opened her mouth, closed it. I said, "I'm not interested in being tolerated because of what I might leave your family someday. I'm not interested in being someone you're kind to because it's financially useful. I am Patrick's mother. I am Cody's grandmother. That is either enough for you or it isn't." Patrick was very still. I turned to him. I said, "I've set some things up with Ms. Hargrove. The details are in a letter she'll send you. I want you to read it and think about it, and then I want you to call me." He nodded. I stood up. I said, "I'd like to take Cody to get ice cream this afternoon, if that's all right." Kelsey looked at Patrick. Something passed between them that I chose not to read too closely. Patrick said, "Yeah, Mom, of course." Cody came running down the hall in his socks, slid 4 feet on the hardwood, and crashed into my legs. He looked up at me with those big, serious eyes and said, "Grandma, did you know that some ants can carry 50 times their own weight?" I said, "I did not know that." He said, "I'll tell you more at the ice cream place." I took his hand and we walked out to my 2009 Camry with the 140,000 miles on it, and I put him in the back seat and I drove him to the Dairy Queen on Route 121, and I bought him a Blizzard the size of his head, and he told me everything he knew about ants, which was considerable. On the drive home, he fell asleep in the back seat with chocolate on his chin. I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes before I started the car. I thought about my father and the $14,000. I thought about Ms. Okafor and her patient explanation of compound interest. I thought about 35 years of packed lunches and the green cooler and the 2009 Camry and the freedom that looks like nothing from the outside. I thought about the trust document sitting in Ms. Hargrove's files, the 529 with Cody's name on it, fully funded, untouchable, the $480,000 waiting for Patrick, patient as I am, with its 2 simple conditions. I thought about Kelsey at the kitchen table with her arms crossed, saying she would have treated me differently if she'd known. And then I thought about the wooden tool set from the Etsy craftsman, hand-sanded, oak, signed on the bottom. It was still sitting on the table in the Frisco house as far as I knew. Nobody had thrown it out. I hoped Cody would find it someday. When he was a little older and the toy made more sense, I hoped he'd pick it up and feel the weight of it and notice the name carved into the bottom, and maybe he'd ask his father, "Who gave me this?" And I hoped Patrick would say, "Your grandmother did. She picked it out herself." That's what I wanted. Not drama. Not an apology delivered under pressure. Not a daughter-in-law who smiles at me now because she's recalculated. I wanted my son to look at his son and tell the truth. That's the whole thing. That's all I ever wanted. I started the car. Cody stirred in the back seat and said, sleepily, "Grandma, are we going home?" I said, "Almost, baby." He said, "Okay," and went back to sleep. I pulled out of the Dairy Queen parking lot and pointed the Camry toward Denton. The sun was going down over the flat Texas land, all gold and ordinary and wide open, and I rolled the window down a little because I like the way the evening air smells here, like cut grass and heat leaving the ground, and I thought, I've had a good life. I really have. I also thought, we're not done yet. Patrick called me 11 days after the conversation at the kitchen table. He had received Miss Hargrove's letter. He had read it twice. He asked if we could have lunch again, just the two of us, and I said yes, of course. At lunch, he didn't talk about the money for the first 20 minutes. We talked about Cody's ant obsession, which had expanded to include beetles. We talked about Patrick's sister in Portland. We talked about a documentary we both watched about the national parks. Then Patrick set down his coffee cup and looked at me and said, "Mom, I signed up for the financial course." I said, "I know. Ms. Hargrove told me." He said, I want to understand things better. You were always so private about it, and I think I let myself not know things because it was easier." I said, "It was easier for me too, for a long time." He said, "I'm sorry about the party. I'm not saying it because of the letter. I'm saying it because it's been sitting on me for months, and I should have said it sooner." I looked at him. My son, 34 years old, a little tired around the eyes, wearing the same kind of sensible shoes his father used to wear. I said, "I know." He said, "What do I do about Kelsey?" I said, "That's between you and Kelsey. I'm not going to tell you how to manage your marriage. What I'll tell you is that I'm not available to be disrespected in my son's home, and that's not negotiable. Everything else is between you two." He nodded. I said, "And Patrick? I want to be clear about something. The money. It was never a test. I didn't give you that $140,000 to see what you'd do with it or who you'd become. I gave it because you're my son and I love you, and I wanted you to have a home. Don't rewrite it into something it wasn't." He said, "Okay." I said, "The conditions in the trust are not punishment. I need to know you can take care of yourself, that you understand what you have and what it takes to keep it. That's not punishment. That's a mother wanting her son to be okay." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Did you always know you had this much?" I said, "I've been watching it grow for 35 years. So yes." He said, "And you just kept going to the dry cleaning counter." I said, "I love my job. I'm good at it. I know every person who walks through that door by name. I know Mrs. Peterson gets her husband's shirts pressed light because he has sensitive skin. I know the Torres family brings in their quinceañera dresses every spring. I know the man on Thursday mornings. I never learned his last name, always asks how my weekend was, and actually listens to the answer." I paused. "The counter is not where I keep my money. It's where I keep my life." Patrick looked at me for a long time. He said, "I want Cody to know you, really know you, the way I'm just starting to." Something moved in my chest. I let it. I said, "Bring him to Denton sometime. I'll show him the counter. He can help me fold things." He smiled. "He'll love that." I said, "I know he will." We finished lunch. Patrick paid, which he almost never does, and I let him. Outside on the sidewalk, he hugged me again, the real kind, both arms, no hurry, and I held on a little longer than usual because he is still my boy, even at 34. And some things don't change no matter how old either of you gets. I drove back to Denton. I opened the dry cleaning counter at 1 o'clock. Mrs. Peterson came in at 2:15 with 3 of her husband's shirts. She said, "Beverly, you look good today. Did something happen?" I said, "Something is happening. I think it's going to be fine." She said, "Well, good," and handed me the shirts. I pressed them. Light, the way she asked. The steam came up around my hands, warm and even. And the radio played something from the 80s that I half remembered, and the bell above the door rang 3 more times before closing, and I turned off the lights at 6 o'clock and drove home to Creekside Drive. The green cooler was on the counter. I packed tomorrow's lunch. Some people see freedom and think it looks like first-class flights and dinner reservations and a closet full of things. Maybe for some people it does. For me, it has always looked like this: the green cooler, the 2009 Camry, the 140,000 miles, the knowledge that I could walk out of any situation I found myself in and land safely on the other side. I've always known that. I'm glad other people are starting to figure it out. I've thought a lot about what causes a moment like that birthday party to happen. Not the laugh itself. That was just the surface. I mean the conditions underneath it. How does a daughter-in-law feel confident enough to mock her mother-in-law's gift in front of a yard full of people? How does a son stand 6 feet away and say nothing? Those things don't happen by accident. They happen slowly, over years, through 1,000 small moments where someone decided the easier thing was to stay quiet and the easier thing kept winning. I was part of that. I need to be honest about that. I chose privacy over transparency, and I told myself it was principle, and it was, mostly. But there was also something in me that wanted to be loved without conditions, without the complication of what I had. And in trying to control for that, I accidentally created a situation where my son didn't fully know me, where his wife could look at me and see nothing worth respecting. That's not entirely their failure. Some of it is mine. What I've learned at 63 is that character is built by the choices you make when no one is measuring. Kelsey's character showed itself when she thought I had nothing. Patrick's character showed itself when he fought for that plate of brisket. And my character, what I hope it showed, was that I could absorb the hurt without becoming bitter, that I could act from a place of clarity instead of anger, and that I could hold open a door for my son even while I was changing the locks. The financial course Patrick enrolled in isn't really about money. It's about paying attention, about taking responsibility for understanding the things that shape your life rather than letting them happen to you. I watched my son coast through his 20s on the assumption that things would work out, and they did, partly because I was quietly making sure of it. And that's exactly what I should not have allowed to continue. Not because I don't love him, because I do. Cody's 529 account is the part of all this I'm most at peace with. That child did nothing wrong. He showed up at his own birthday party full of joy, slid across the hardwood in his socks, and told me everything he knew about ants. He gets to go to college. He gets that clean start. Whatever happens between the adults in that family, Cody has something solid waiting for him, and nobody can touch it. The thing I keep coming back to is this. Real love and real respect are not the same as niceness. Niceness is easy. Anyone can be nice when it costs them nothing. What I asked of Patrick, what I'm still asking, is something harder. I'm asking him to be honest about who he's been and intentional about who he wants to become. That's not punishment. That's what it means to grow up. Some people do it at 22. Patrick's doing it at 34. It's not too late. It's never too late as long as the door is still open. I left the door open. I always leave the door open, but I stopped holding it.